Racist passenger makes an attempt to have a black man removed, but he is stopped when the black man flashes his FBI badge, a mixture of muted conversations, the odd cough, and the faint buzz of the engines. The hum of the aircraft cabin formed a soundscape that was familiar to the majority of passengers. On the other hand, for one particular individual, this flight would become anything from ordinary. Prejudice, power, and the type of poetic justice that left you gasping for air were all elements that were examined in this novel. Everyone on board was anxious to go to their destinations, and the aircraft was completely full with passengers, a tall, broad-shouldered guy with a serene attitude and an appearance of quiet assurance. Marcus Johnson was one of the individuals who took part in the event. While he was sitting in his window seat, he pulled out a book to pass the time. He was wearing a neat white shirt and black pants, in order to fulfill the requirements of his profession. Marcus often had to travel at short notice, so he was no stranger to lengthy flights. Nevertheless, he was looking forward to a day of tranquility and no disturbances. The seating arrangement was the subject of a loud complaint from a middle-aged guy called Harold, who was seated a few seats behind the flight attendant. He spoke with a tone that was oozing with contempt, saying, "I paid a good deal of money for this ticket, and I shouldn't have to sit next to shore people." Sarah, a young lady who worked as a flight attendant, made an effort to calm him down, but Harold was unyielding in his need for relief. It was Marcus who eventually caught his attention as his gaze wandered about the cabin. Harold spoke to him in an accusatory manner and stated, "It is not a comfortable position for me to be seated close to him. Please relocate me, or even better, remove him off this aircraft. I demand it." The cabin became completely quiet. Marcus, who had been able to hear the disturbance, became the focus of everyone's attention. There was no discernible emotion on his face as he carefully closed his book. As Sarah approached Marcus, it was obvious that she was agitated. "Sir, I am very sorry about this situation. So that we may prevent any additional problems, would you be ready to trade seats with me?" A steady glance was maintained by Marcus as he gazed up at her. "I'm not the problem here," he said in a composed manner. "In addition, I won't be moving at all." Having gained confidence from the attention, Harold got to his feet and marched over to take Marcus's place. As he scoffed, "Listen here," he said. "This is something that I am not going to sit here and put up with, and I have no idea who you think you are. You have no business being here." With his towering presence, Marcus loomed above Harold. As a whole, everyone in the cabin held their breath. It seemed for a brief period of time that things may get more serious. One moment later, however, Marcus went into his pocket and took out a little badge that was shining brightly. The whole cabin, including Harold, was able to view it since he held it up in a forceful and authoritative tone. Marcus spoke the words, "FBI, before I arrest you for harassing and interrupting a federal officer, I would like to advise that you take a seat right now." There was a noticeable loss of color on Harold's face. He lurched backwards, saying something that was completely incomprehensible, and then he sagged into his seat. Marcus only nodded and sat back down, resuming to his book as if nothing had occurred. The cabin erupted in applause from the people within. As the aircraft made its way down the runway, the stress that had been building up within the cabin gradually subsided. Sarah approached Marcus once again, this time with a grin of gratitude shown on her face. "I am grateful to you for handling that situation in such a professional manner," she remarked. "I've never seen anything that remotely resembles it." Marcus gave a flat shrug. "To my regret, this is not the first occasion that I have had to deal with anything similar to this. However, we can only hope that this will be the last time for him." While all of this was going on, Harold sat there in startled silence, avoiding making eye contact with anybody who was around. A hushed derision was now being directed against the one who had been so eager to pass judgment and demand special treatment. As the journey continued, he remained silent and did not utter a single word. Marcus was one of the first people to depart from the jet once it had successfully landed. He couldn't help but crack a grin as he made his way through baggage claim. He believed that the administration of justice did not necessarily include the use of handcuffs and the presence of a courtroom. Sometimes all that was required was a badge and a few well-selected words to do the task. However, what about Harold? First things first, never judge a book by its cover, particularly when that cover conceals an FBI badge. Let's just say that he picked up an important lesson that day. His phone was buzzing in his pocket as he made his way through the crowded airport terminal. Marcus was in the middle of his journey. Taking a quick check at the computer, he saw a message from his colleague, Agent Ramirez, which said, "Touchdown by any chance. There is a scenario that is developing in the downtown area. As soon as possible, I need you," as the burden of his obligations began to rest once more on his shoulders. Marcus let out a sigh, his fleeting moment of contentment gradually dissipating. He quickly composed a response which read, "Just arrived. On my way to you, in spite of this." A voice could be heard calling out from behind him before he could leave the airport. "Agent Johnson, please. Don't be late." When Marcus looked around, he saw Sarah, the flight attendant, racing toward him. Her heels were clicking on the glossy floor as she continued her journey. She seemed just a little bit out of breath, and her cheeks were flushed. She expressed her gratitude by saying, "I just wanted to say thank you again," a sincere tone in her voice. "When you were there, the things that you did mattered a great deal. This applies not just to myself, but to everyone else on that aircraft as well." The grin that Marcus offered her was one of gratitude and appreciation. He addressed it in a humble manner. "It's just part of the job. On the other hand, I am grateful. Ensure that you take care of yourself, Sarah." Standing there for a few periods, Sarah saw him vanish into the throng as he walked away from her. Whether it was his unassuming strength or his unflappable serenity, Marcus created an impact on everyone he encountered. To ensure that she would not forget his name, she made a mental note. While everything was going on, Harold, the one who had been responsible for the trouble that occurred on the airplane, was experiencing a quite different experience. This sensation of embarrassment stuck to him like a second skin as he made his way through the airport, and he was unable to shake it. It seemed as if people were muttering about him and laughing at his expense whenever he turned his head. Despite the fact that his phone was constantly buzzing with alerts, he chose to disregard them. He was not in the mood to engage in conversation with anybody. The fact that Harold's activities on the aircraft had already gone viral was something that he was unaware about. Racist passenger tries to have black man removed from flight gets humiliated when he reveals he's FBI. The description said on the video that was uploaded to the internet by a passenger who had used their mobile device to film the whole episode. After just a few hours, the film had already amassed millions of views and was quickly spreading like wildfire. When Harold finally arrived at the baggage claim, his face was already plastered throughout social media, and the remarks that were posted about him were quite harsh. According to the words of one individual, "Karma is a beautiful thing," another person remarked. "Imagine being so entitled that you try to get an FBI agent kicked off a plane." This is what they were thinking. This person is deserving of everything that is going to happen to him. When Harold's phone rang once again, he picked it up and answered it this time. That person was his supervisor. The discussion that took place was brief and got right to the topic. "The video has been seen by all of us, Harold. Having someone like this represent our organization is not something that we can tolerate. You need to resign." From this moment on, effective. The feeling in Harold's gut sank. He made an effort to voice his disapproval, but that was unsuccessful. He was standing there, clenching his phone tightly, and he could feel the walls approaching him from all sides. His life was falling apart in before of his eyes, and there was nothing he could do to stop it from happening on its own. When Marcus returned to the FBI headquarters, he was already far into the investigation of his next case. The Bureau of Investigation was in a race against the clock to put an end to a high-profile cybercrime ring that had been targeting large companies. Marcus pushed himself into the job, his concentration remaining unwavering. In spite of the fact that he was analyzing data and coordinating with his team. The events that occurred during the trip continued to linger in the back of his mind. Agent Ramirez strolled over to him later that evening and placed a printout in front of him as he took a seat at his desk to check the case files. A snapshot of the video that went viral was what it was. With a smirk on his face, Ramirez said, "You make me famous, Marcus. It was a good job that you were able to stop the individual." Marcus cast a quick look at the picture and then shook his head. He said, "I didn't do it for the attention," and he was right. Everything I wanted was for him to realize that the acts he takes have repercussions. An air of seriousness appeared on Ramirez's face as he nodded. "You would be surprised to learn that something like this occurs much too often. Hopefully, after seeing this video, individuals would reconsider their behavior before acting in such a manner." Marcus responded with a maybe. However, transformation does not take place overnight. There is a long way to go. Marcus awoke the next morning to find an overwhelming number of texts and emails waiting for him. All of the news organizations sought interviews. He was the recipient of gratitude from advocacy organizations. Even his former high school administrator had reached out to him and complimented him on his position as an example for others to follow. Marcus was overwhelmed yet appreciative for the opportunity. It would have been worth it if his efforts could motivate even a single person to take a stance against injustice. As for Harold, he had spent the subsequent several weeks keeping a low profile and avoiding the attention of the public. His work, his reputation, and even some of his closest friends had all been taken away from him as a result of the response after the video. However, at the times when there was silence, he started to think about how he had behaved. It was the first time in his life that he had a genuine comprehension of the magnitude of the influence that his words and deeds had. Although it was a challenging lesson, it was one that he needed to learn. Several months later, Harold made contact with Marcus via a connection that they both had. It was not for the sake of his reputation that he wanted to apologize. Rather, it was as a result of his real sorrow for what he had undertaken. Marcus reached an agreement with him to meet, and the two men sat down together for an open and honest discussion. In spite of the fact that it was not simple, by the time it was over, Harold had already made the first move toward atonement. It was impossible for anybody to have anticipated the ways in which the viral event would continue to have repercussions as the months went by. The modest FBI agent Marcus Johnson, who had maintained his composure and held his ground with calm dignity, found himself catapulted into the limelight in ways that he had never anticipated. He handled everything with the same composure and elegance that had characterized him on that fatal trip, which was a testament to his character. People from all throughout the nation felt a profound connection to Marcus's ordeal. Advocate organizations and influential members of the community started reaching out to him and asking him to speak at events on the necessity of speaking out against discrimination, racial fairness, and accountability. To begin, Marcus exhibited some reluctance. Rather than seeking the spotlight, he preferred to let his deeds speak for themselves. He was not the kind of person who seek attention. However, after receiving some support from his family and coworkers, he settled on the decision. His first speech in front of an audience was delivered at a community center in his hometown. There were a lot of people in the room, and the atmosphere was really lively. With his FBI badge shining brightly on his belt, Marcus strode up to the stage and started their conversation. He discussed the difficulties he had encountered as a black man growing up in the United States of America, as well as the turning points in his life that had influenced him. In his speech, he emphasized the need of having empathy for others and seeing people as unique individuals rather than as generalizations. The reason he told Harold the account of the trip was not to embarrass him, but rather to demonstrate how seemingly little acts may result in significant alterations. The spectators were completely enthralled. The gathering exploded into a standing ovation by the time he had completed his speech. Marcus had an upswell of optimism. Perhaps without a doubt, his narrative has the potential to motivate others to improve themselves in their performance. In the meanwhile, Harold was actively engaged in the process of self-discovery. He was forced to face the prejudices that he had carried about for years as a result of the event, which had resulted in harsh repercussions. He joined a support group for persons who were wanting to unlearn prejudice and started attending courses on racial responsibility. It was not an easy task since old habits are difficult to break, but Harold was determined to make a difference. On a certain day, he made another attempt to get in touch with Marcus, this time soliciting his assistance. Harold said, "I want to do more," and he meant it. "I want to learn from my errors and help others learn from them. However, I am at a loss for words in this regard." Harold was encouraged to tell his tale in public by Marcus, who is known for his pragmatic viewpoint. The warning that Marcus issued was, "It is not going to be easy. There is a possibility that people may not forgive you quickly. However, if you are genuine, people will accept your words." This piece of wisdom was taken to heart by Harold. His path from ignorance to knowledge was captured in an opinion piece that he wrote for a prominent publication. He did not attempt to provide an explanation or gloss over his conduct. Rather than that, he admitted that he was wrong and said that he really wanted to make atonement. Numerous others lauded Harold for his bravery as the article ignited a national discourse about responsibility and atonement. Marcus and Harold's paths met once again, this time in a more official situation. As destiny would have it, this happens again. Both men were asked to take part in a panel discussion which was themed From Conflict to Understanding, Stories of Growth and Change. The conversation was organized by a nonprofit group that is committed to addressing issues of racial inequity. A large number of people watched the event online, in addition to the thousands that were present in the theater. The crowd was uncertain about what to anticipate as Marcus and Harold stood on stage together. On the other hand, what transpired after that was a profound and forthright discussion. The need of sticking up for what is right, even when it is difficult, was emphasized by Marcus in his speech. The actions that Harold was doing to become a better person were discussed, as well as his journey of self-reflection from beginning to end. Together, they showed that even in the most improbable of situations, it is possible to bring about improvement. Both of the guys found themselves working together more regularly as a result of the panel's overwhelming success. In order to foster racial understanding, they collaborated on a variety of projects, ranging from professional development seminars to educational programs in schools. The partnership seemed improbable, yet it turned out to be very successful. In the years that followed, the narrative of Marcus and Harold had evolved into a case study that demonstrated the efficacy of responsibility and atonement. Marcus proceeded to advance his career inside the Federal Bureau of Investigation (FBI), gaining a reputation as a leader who led with compassion and integrity by virtue of his leadership. In the meanwhile, Harold became an advocate for racial fairness, encouraging people to face their own prejudices by using his narrative as a source of motivation. A new significance had been attached to the footage of the flying incident, which had previously been a source of notoriety. More than simply a narrative involving a racist passenger and an FBI agent, it had evolved into something much more. The narrative was about the strength of standing up for what is right, about the possibility for change, and about the idea of progress. In the course of his travels, Marcus found himself on yet another aircraft, this time to a conference where he was scheduled to deliver the keynote address. After he had settled into his seat, he became aware of a person whose face he recognized a few rows back. It was Harold, who went to the same event as well and was also traveling there. There was a grin and a nod of agreement between the two guys. Marcus sat back in his seat and reflected on how far they had both come as the jet pulled away from the ground. Despite the fact that the world was far from ideal, he found strength in hearing tales like theirs. Changing one person at a time, one moment at a time, was completely feasible. While the airplane was flying over the clouds, Marcus couldn't help but believe that the sky was the limit, even if it was only a little bit different.